Hi, my name is Chad Ellis. I was an investment banker with James Capel, which is now part of the Hong Kong Shanghai Bank. I have an MBA from Harvard Business School, and currently I own and operate a business called Bodeborg Boston in Malden, which is just north of Boston, Massachusetts.
My name is Charlie Ellis. I've had a very wonderful educational experience. I went to Exeter, then I went to Yale College, then I went to Harvard Business School, and then I did a PhD at New York University. And my career has been a learning career all the way through. My primary career has been consulting in the field of investing with wealthy individuals and substantial institutions, including several major universities. And I've taught the course on investment management both at Harvard Business School and the Yale School of Management. And I've also had the privilege of writing over 20 books, most of which have to do with investing, and 120 professional articles in investing. And I had the privilege also of serving as the chair of the CFA Institute, which is the professional organization of investment managers.
Hi, my name is Harold Ellis, and I'm a ne'er-do-well cat. So, thank you for joining us. How do you guys feel when you receive money? Let's start with that.
Just emotionally?
Yeah, emotionally.
Yeah. I think it's always fun when you receive money. I think for me, I've learned to take it as part of the whole picture and be calm about it. So I think there's always a thing of if you get $100, like, oh well, let me just spend it. It's found money, and rather to say, okay, let's pool this in with the money that we're saving or investing. Rather than reacting to the fact that we've gotten money right now.
Charlie, do you have any thoughts?
I think it's very easy to say, wow, I just earned some money, or wow, somebody just gave me some money, or wow, I just found some money. Those are three very different situations. Let's assume for a minute that it's money that you earned. You put in a lot of time and effort, and you get a reward for it. Converting that reward into something that is really meaningful to you should be a deliberate process. Take your time so you do something you're really glad you did. And it may be to save for college. It may be that you spend it on a present for your parents. It may be that you spend it on some clothing for yourself. But be careful not to do whimsy or first impression. Give it some thought, because if you save some money, you've got a chance to spend that money in a way that's really productive from your point of view.
When you have money with you, we could talk about cash and plastic and all that. Does that affect you? Like, if your wallet's stuffed, are you acting differently than when you're like, this is my last $20 for the week?
Yeah, I think that can play out in two ways. I think if you have a weekly or a monthly budget that you're paying attention to, like particularly if you say, okay, for things that are fun or luxuries, if you give yourself a budget, it's very easy at the start of the period to feel like, oh yeah, I've got plenty, I'm gonna spend it. And then as you get closer, you're sort of, oh, I've only got $20 left for this period of time, and you start to get more cautious. I've seen just for myself, if I have a lot of cash in my wallet, I am more likely to spend money. And so I deliberately don't carry a lot of cash. I carry some because sometimes it's good to have cash. But I try not to have too much.
How do you feel when you buy something new, and then how do you feel, like, say, 3 months later?
I'll give you two different answers. Right now, I'm generally very happy with the things that I buy. That is partly because when I was younger, I bought things a little more impulsively, and I noticed that I ended up with a lot of things that seemed like a great thing to have at the time. I thought, oh, for sure I'm going to use this, or for sure I'm going to play with this, or whatever it might be, and then didn't. And so now I'm a little more deliberate, and I think whatever it is that I'm buying, if I'm buying something that's food because I like to cook, or if I'm buying a board game because I like to play games, or clothes or anything, I really only buy it if I know when I'm going to use it. So I don't just, very rarely will pick up something of like, oh, this looks great. It's more like, okay, I've got friends coming over on Saturday. This is a game I've been really wanting to try. My friends would enjoy it. I'm going to get it and we're going to play it on Saturday. As opposed to like, oh, I'll just pick up this game and I'm sure we'll play it one day. I still have games in shrink wrap that I bought years ago that I've, have not ever opened up.
One thing that Chad said that I think is really worth emphasizing is spend money deliberately. And best way to do that might be to have one of your best friends with you when you go shopping, and only if you both agree that's a good idea. Or if you're married, have your spouse go with you. Or if you've got parents, have your parents go with you, so that somebody's there saying, is this really the way you want to spend the money? Because once it's spent, you can't change your mind. You'll have whatever it is that you bought. And one other thing, Harold, you spoke about when you first purchase something. It really is hard to believe, but if you get a new car and drive out of the lot and go 100 yards, it probably costs you $2,000 or $3,000 to go 100 yards because it's no longer a brand new car. And watching out for that sort of an experience is a good idea. Easy way to deal with that is to buy things that are secondhand. But it really is helpful to think about a year from now or 6 months from now or even a month from now, how will I feel about this particular purchase and how will it feel about me?
I think one of the things I would add to that is this is very personal. This is different from person to person. And so it's good to look at your own experience and see where do you find that you've made purchases that turned out not to give you the kind of value that you thought. Like I mentioned food, this is a silly example, but I will sometimes want to buy avocados because I really like avocados, but they don't last very long. So I've learned not to buy them unless I already know what I'm making with them and I'm making it like tonight or tomorrow. Because otherwise, and it still happens every now and then, otherwise I end up with rotten avocados. So, everyone's going to have their own thing of where they buy it and then down the road, okay, maybe it's like a beautiful thing that you in the end say, oh yeah, no, I have a shelf full of these things and I'm not actually playing it, but whatever it is.
Well, that brings us right to, how does hunger affect you when you're food shopping?
Badly.
Yeah. that is, it is, and that's true for just about anything. Like, you should not go shopping when you really want, like when you're short of whatever it is you're going for, and food is the most obvious one. If you're hungry and you go shopping, all of a sudden like, oh, that looks so good, oh, that looks so good, oh, that looks so good. If you are going to go shopping when you're hungry, write up your shopping list and stick to it. Say, okay, I'm buying these things, this will take care of me for the next, because if you're sitting at home and you're not in front of all those items, it's a lot easier to say, okay, yes, I want, one bag of chips as a snack, but I'm not going to get, but if you're in the store, then you can start grabbing it.
I get into trouble with, I'll go to the butcher's counter and I'll see an interesting cut of meat.
Mm-hmm.
I have no plan for it, but I'm like, I'll have a go anyway.
Yeah.
And I've gotten into trouble with that.
Chad's observation about writing it down, make a shopping list and take that with you. And if it's not on your shopping list, at least ask yourself, did you make a mistake not putting it on the shopping list? Or are you going to make a mistake and buy it?
How about, talk about an item you've purchased after seeing or hearing advertisements, and does it work as well? So your own experiences with advertising and things you've bought, and relate to, they hold up or the expectations?
Let me try that one.
Sure.
Advertising can provide you with information that enables you to be an informed buyer. Advertising could also make you want something more than you otherwise would. I'm all for the first type of advertising. Be skeptical and cautious about the second type of advertising. And we're all human beings, so we have to recognize that the people that are doing advertising have got us figured out, and they're trying to influence our decision making. And then we have to fight back and say, well, I'm going to try to influence my decision making to be objective, sensible, and something I'll be pleased by a month from now, a week from now, a year from now, looking back on it.
What? Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, I think that's exactly right. And I've built up a habit of only allowing for me, I try to only let advertising be the thing that starts a search. So if I see something advertised and it looks like that might be something I'd really like to have, try to set the advertisement aside and then look at reviews, look at, what do I know about the product? Do I know anyone else who has it? If it's, I remember when we were kids, our parents had a rule. We could not ask for a present that was something we had first seen advertised. It had to be something that we'd, if we'd played with it at our friend's house and it was great and we wanted it, then that could be a birthday present or a Christmas present. But if we said, okay, I want this, I saw it advertised on TV, that wasn't enough. And we negotiated the agreement that if we'd first seen it on TV, but then played it at a friend's house and still wanted it, that was still okay. But that's really important, to have something that's really tangible.
Good. What happens when you put money into a savings account?
Depends a little bit, but most savings account will pay a small amount of interest. And so over time, that money becomes a little bit more money.
And it's also worth keeping in mind that inflation is constantly out there. And if the Federal Reserve gets the system going just the way they'd like it, you'd be down around 2% inflation. If they get close, you'd be at 3% inflation. So if you're getting a 5% payment on your savings and 2 or 3% gets taken away by inflation, it's only the leftover afterwards that is real money that you can spend.
How about charitable giving? What's its purpose and what are your thoughts about it?
So I think the purpose of charitable giving is really going to vary from person to person. I think charitable giving can be both a really valuable thing to you as a person, if you're able to support something that you care about, that you're glad it's out there, if there's an organization that's doing work for people that you care about or for a cause that you care about, then you can get a lot of personal enjoyment for it. I think it can also be an important part of being a citizen in the broadest sense, not just a citizen of a particular country, but saying, okay, I am part of this society, I get a lot of benefit from being part of that society, and I would like to contribute back to it. And one of the ways that you can contribute back is by giving to charitable causes that are helpful.
I agree.
Okay. What can you do to better manage your money? What are your thoughts about that?
Write it down.
Yep.
Have a plan.
Yeah.
Keep in mind that there's a limit to how much money you're earning or have, and you have to stay within those limits, and you're trying to create the greatest degree of satisfaction for you and your family, if you have a family, of that limited supply of money. And you can trade it off. You could go on a vacation, you could buy something that's rather special, you could make a charitable contribution, you can save money for another year, you can save for college education, and you have to figure out, what do you really care about? Because when they talk about money being fungible, that's really true. Money can be used for all kinds of purposes. You can use money for terribly bad purposes too, but when you're trying to think about what are the real uses you want to get from money, think about it carefully and then double check your answers and take your time.
I think the thing that I would add to that, I agree with everything that Dad was saying. I think the thing that I would add to that is make sure that you're thinking about and managing your emotions. And I'm thinking in particular of two things. One is that if you're investing for the long term, you want to not let your emotions affect the way that you're doing that. You should come up with that plan. There are some methods like index funds that are going to be great long-term investments. There are IRAs and 401ks and sort of tax advantage things that are great. But the key thing is make that decision And then if the stock market starts going up and down, or if you're hearing about, this newest, thing that you can invest in, let those go and really stick with your plan. The other thing which I think is really helpful is learning how to enjoy saving and investing as a triumph. If you set yourself a budget and give yourself credit when you meet that or exceed it, and when you've put money away, so that you're tracking that as a victory. I think it makes it a lot easier to sustain over time, because if you're not enjoying the saving, if you see it as like, oh, I put another $100 away, I'm never going to see that again, I'm going to, it's going to be so long before that ever comes back, then that's draining on you. Whereas if you see it as like, boom, I've scored again, like I've done this again, I'm meeting this goal that I set for myself, that can make it a lot easier.
Well, I agree with that. I'd like to make a couple of additions. Saving for a specific purpose. If you're saving for college, for example, and you're going to be paying to the college what tuition bills in 3 years, 5 years, 6 or 7 years, that money should be either in a savings account or in a bond mutual fund, because you can't take the risk that it just happens the day that you want to write the check, just happens. That was the day when the stock market was way down. On the other hand, if you're thinking about this is part of my retirement money, and most people ought to be more concerned about their retirement years than most people are, that's 30, 40, 50, even 60 or 70 years out into the future. In that long wavelength, you shouldn't be doing anything but bonds. You should be investing in stocks entirely, whether mutual funds, index funds being the best kind of mutual fund, or individual stocks. That's your choice. I would choose index funds because it's less dependent on a specific decision, broad diversification, lots of different companies invested simultaneously. If you're going to be invested for 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years, which is the case for anybody who's thinking about their retirement funds, that should be entirely invested in equities. Because over 20, 30, 40, 50 years, it all works out. Now, as you get towards the time when you're retiring or retired, you might decide that you want to put some into bonds. You might not. That's a personal decision. And when you get there, I'd be glad to discuss it with you. By the time you get there, most people would have forgotten any advice that might be given. But if you're thinking about something for the short run, you want to buy a car, you want to pay for college tuition, you've got something in your mind that really is important to you to buy, that money should be in a savings account or in a bond portfolio. So it doesn't have as high a rate of return, correct, but it has a much more assured or reliable rate of return. And you don't want to take the risk that today's the wrong day. It just happened to be a terrible time and nothing I can do about it. The bill has got to be paid and I've just had the stock market go way down. Skip that. Go to the bond market.
Excellent. What's the difference between savings and investing, including the reasons for using one over the other?
Well, if I think the way that I would describe it, saving is setting aside money for security, like putting it into a savings account, whereas investing is where you're setting aside money for a return over time. And so saving is saying, I'm going to make sure that my spending is less than my income, so that I have extra money, which I can put to whatever use I want to be. And as we were talking about earlier, that might be I'm saving for a purchase. I need to get $1,000 to make a down payment on a car, or I'm going to buy something else, or saving for college. Investing might be much more long term and not for a specific purchase, but it's saying, okay, I'm going to take my savings and I want to build it into as large amount of money for when I need it down the road. So if you think about saving for retirement, it's a much more long-term thing, and it's much vaguer as to what you're actually going to do. You don't know when you're that age exactly what your expenses are going to be, what you may want to spend that money on. You're just trying to build as big an amount of money as you can for when that time comes.
Chad said something really important at the very beginning, it's worth emphasizing. You can look at saving as I can't, I won't, I don't, negatives. You can also look at it as positive. I'll be able to do more, I'll be able to do exactly what I want to do if I just save enough. And if you think of saving as increasing your freedom to make choices that really mean something to you, great. If you think of it as collapsing down on you and all kinds of negative discipline, it'd be very hard to say, and I really want to do a lot of saving. So if you don't save, you don't have anything to invest. And the first step towards any investing program is to save what will then be invested.
What's the concept of return on investment and risk, and how are they related?
Sure. So return on investment is the money that your investment generates. So in the simplest form, if you have a savings account that pays a 5% interest rate and you put $100 into it, a year from now you have $105. You've gotten a 5% return on your investment. Different investments will have different expected rates of return, but they will also have different risk, which is sort of the variation on what the actual rate of return might be. So if you're investing in the equity market, over time your expected rate of return is higher, but in any one year you could even have a negative rate of return. It could be the stock market goes down. And that goes back to what we were talking before about matching how you're investing to what your goals are. If you have long-term goals, then the risk over time of the equity market gets smoothed out, and I would argue is less risky than just about anything else because of inflation as being one of the real risks. In the short term, there's a lot more variation, and so you're making a trade-off there. You're expecting higher risk higher returns over time, but you have higher risks, particularly in the short term, and so there could be more variation.
Agreed.
Okay. How about the difference between simple interest and compound interest? How do they work?
So compound interest is the idea that in addition to the money that you put in, as you earn interest, that also becomes money in your investment and you get paid interest on that.
Use your $100 and 5%.
Sure. So if you have $100 and you have a 5% interest, then after 1 year you have $105, but the next year you don't get $5, you get 5% on 105, so that's $5.25. That seems like a small difference because it's just 1 year, but as you go over time, compound interest allows for quite amazing amounts of growth. And this is particularly why we talk about advocating equities with a higher rate of return, because those small differences between 5% and 7% or 7% and 9% over 20, 30, 40, 50 years turn into doubling, tripling, quadrupling compared in terms of what your total return is.
What's the concept of diversification in investing?
Sure. So if you think back to the idea of risk again, if you have all of your money in one company, that one company could do very well, but also companies go broke. It could be that you picked the right industry, but the company that you picked in that industry got beaten by a bunch of other ones and didn't do very well. The more different companies you're invested in, or in some cases you could argue different types of assets, but let's just stick with companies as a concept. The less likely any one company having trouble is going to mean that your overall investment isn't doing well. One of the reasons that we both like index funds is an index fund allows you at a very low cost of transaction cost to invest in a very broad range of companies so that you essentially eliminate the risk that you'd have of any one company doing poorly because you're investing in the overall stock market.
Another way of thinking about it is if you were going to have the most important party in your next several years. Could be a wedding, it could be a parent's wedding, it could be graduation day. You really don't want to have it be pouring rain that day, and you don't want it to be freezing cold that day. You'd like it to be a nice sunny day. And you want to minimize the risk by spreading it out. Well, you can't minimize the risk on weddings, graduation day, but you sure can on investing. And so spreading your bets, having several different things that you're investing. And when Chad talks about index funds, we're now talking about 500 or even 1,000 different companies in being part of the investment program. That's a lot of diversification, and it has another big advantage. When you're that widely diversified, candidly, it's boring. And
That's true.
don't feel excited. And the reality is the average investor penalizes herself or himself 2% a year, year after year after year after year, on average, by making what are, in retrospect, dumb or too smart mistakes. And protecting against that, because protecting against yourself, is a tremendous positive advantage.
Let me take another way of looking at it. Suppose you had all of your savings, and I have a 6-sided die, and I say to you, how does this sound? We roll this die. If it comes up 1 or 2, you lose everything. But if it comes up 4, 5, or 6, you double your money. And on a 3, nothing happens. Well, you've got a better chance of doubling your money than losing everything. So it's a good bet, but it's a very risky bet. But now what if I said, okay, for every dollar you have saved, we'll roll 1 die. For each dollar, we're going to roll lots and lots of dice. And for every time it's a 1 or a 2, you lose $1. And every time it's a 4, 5, or 6, you get $2. That suddenly is a really safe bet, and you're just going to make a ton of money. So by having investments that are good, but having a lot of them that are not connected to each other, so that one die's roll doesn't affect another die roll, then you get all the expected value, but you don't have to worry that you're going to get unlucky with what you chose.
Why is it important to save and invest for retirement?
Well, a couple of reasons. One is when you retire, you're going to still have expenses, and they may be bigger expenses than you have now. You're going to want to do things and travel and enjoy life, hopefully. You may have family members that you want to be able to take care of. You may have more medical bills than you have as a young person. So you need to have money available, and that's going to be at a time, by definition, if you're retiring, you either have less or no earned income. Some people retire and still work. As you know, Dad probably will never really retire. But the other thing is that what we talked about before with compound interest, money that you save now will multiply by amounts that are really hard to believe, and you should take the time and do the math, so that if you are saving money now, it will be so much more when you retire than if you wait until you're 40 or 50. You may say, oh, well, right now I need my money, I don't make very much, I'm going to make more money later. That's true, but any money that you save when you're young will be worth so much more during your retirement. So getting into that habit, starting to save, even if it's a relatively small amount, putting it into a really good long-term investment will mean that you have that money when you retire.
All of us who work and earn income will have Social Security benefits. That protects us from abject poverty, but that's all. And most people have a tough time thinking about what is it like being on my own and needing to have enough money to cover. Chad's right. Most people decide they want to have some fun in their first 10 or 15 years of retirement, and their expenses actually go up because of travel and recreational activities that they've been saving for in their own minds for a long, long time. Now's their chance because they've got plenty of time. The second kind of expense that goes up is healthcare, if you don't have complete coverage, and most people don't, the cost of healthcare goes up and up and up, faster and faster and faster. And typical American adult spends 60% of their entire lifetime of healthcare expenses in the last year. You've got to be prepared for that, either by insurance, or by having a rich uncle, or by saving it yourself and being prepared to cover your own expenses. I recommend the second, the saving it and having it to cover your own expenses.
But here we go. All right. Requirement 5. So we're going to talk about different types of investments. So let's start with common stocks.
Okay, so in terms of what they are?
Yes.
Yeah, so common stocks basically represent ownership in a company. If you hear about the stock market, those are companies who have securitized their ownership. They've created shares of stock that can be bought and sold by anybody. And if you own shares of stock, you have part of that company. You don't necessarily get to make decisions for it because you only have a little part. But anytime that company pays out money to its owners, called dividends, that money comes to you. And those stocks can be bought and sold pretty much at any time.
How about mutual funds?
Mutual funds, either bond funds or stock funds, would own 50, 60, 70, 80 different stocks, or 50, 60, 70, 80 different bonds. So they have diversification, and they charge a fee for providing that service, and the fee is usually somewhere between 0.5% and a little bit more than that. Interesting that we talk about the fee as a percentage of the assets, because if we talked about it as a percent of the earnings, that typically 5% for bonds and 7% for stocks, then we'd be talking about 15% for a stock mutual fund. And if you said, well, actually I don't want to pay for something that I don't need, I want to pay for something that is a benefit. What's the benefit? Then you get into the actively managed mutual funds and how do they compare to index funds, sometimes called passive funds. And the reality is active investment management funds over long time periods, like 20 years, almost always underperform the index funds, even though the fees for an index fund are substantially lower. That's not a big failure, but it's a failure.
And then over time.
Some mutual funds will get upset because they haven't been beating the market, and they'll decide they're going to try harder, and then they'll make mistakes.
Let's talk about life insurance.
So what I would say about insurance generally is insurance is about reducing risk. So you're paying more than the expected return on the insurance. And so generally speaking, I would say you want to get insurance for risks that you need protection from.
Or
So-
risks you can't afford to take yourself.
Yes, well, that's sort of what I mean by that. But yeah, so risks that you can't afford to cover yourself. So life insurance can be particularly important for, let's say you have a family where one person is the principal earner for that family. Life insurance on that person can protect the rest of the family in the event that they were to die. Life insurance is often pitched as a vehicle to, kind of save money, but it's not a good vehicle for that.
Let's go back to life insurance. There are two kinds, whole life and term insurance. Term insurance, usually purchased from a savings bank, is a pretty good bargain. But term it'll be for 5 years or maybe 10 years, not forever. And it's particularly good for a family where the kids are in the process of growing up, and the breadwinner wants to be sure the kids are going to be okay if something awful happens to the breadwinner. That is a sensible trade-off of risk of premature death and return or cost. Whole life insurance, you pay all through your life to keep that policy valid. And my own personal view is that that's a very poor investment, and most people should never do it. If you've got an emotional reason for saying, I don't care whether it's a good idea or not, it just makes a lot of difference to me in the way I feel about it, okay, but it's not something that somebody would ever recommend to you objectively on risk and return. Whereas term insurance during your key earning years, when the kids are still growing up and they're not on their own, that's a different question. The same thing applies, in my view, to automobile insurance. You do not want to get an insurance product that will cover any costs that you incur. Only insurance that you want is one that would cost more than you can handle yourself. So maybe it's $10,000, maybe it's $15,000, maybe it's even $20,000, depending on what your earnings level would be. But you can self-insure for small things, dents, scratches, and the like. And the cost of processing the insurance is pretty much the same, the small things and the big things. But the cost per value of the small things can be really huge, and a big mistake, in my view, to be getting that kind of insurance. You don't need it.
How about a certificate of deposit?
Most individuals will not have anything to do with CDs or certificates of deposit, but it is a form of saving in which you agree to leave the money with the bank for 5 years or 10 years. The bank agrees in advance that they will pay you this much money each year. And for substantial savers, it can be a very sensible thing to be doing, but it's not much better than owning bonds, and it's less liquid, or harder to sell or change your mind.
Yeah, I mostly think of those as being for a very, very specific purchase. You've decided that in 5 years you're going to buy a house and you've been putting aside money for the down payment. You could put that into a 5-year CD and say, okay, I want zero risk, I want some return, I know exactly when I'm going to want that money out, so I don't care that I don't have access to it in the meantime. Yeah, but
It's the same example that we talked about earlier. If one of your kids is going to go to college, or you are going to go to college, and you're saving for that purpose, and you got a lot of savings, you might very well buy CDs that will last, they mature or pay out at the time that you're going to need the money to pay your tuition.
How about a savings account?
So savings account is money that you're leaving with the bank. You have full access to it. It will pay a very small rate of return. So it is better than keeping cash under your mattress or in a safe, but it's a very small rate of return. So it would be appropriate for an emergency fund. It's good to have access to some cash, that in case something bad happens and you need money right away, you can get it. But it should really only be for most people.
And how about a U.S. savings bond?
So a savings bond, any kind of a bond, is you are lending money to someone who is promising to pay it back with very specific amounts of money generally. So there's usually coupon payments, which are payments coming to you every 6 months or every year, and then you get the principal back at the end. A savings bond with the U.S. government has the advantage that the full force of the U.S. government is behind paying it back, whereas if you take a bond out that is a corporate bond, a company, that company might be unable to pay. So a U.S. savings bond, you can pretty much guarantee you are going to get that money back over time. A bond can also be sold. So if you buy a bond, you can either wait and have all the money come back to you over time, or at some point you can say, okay, you know what, I want to sell this for whatever the current value of that bond is, which could go up or down depending on interest rates.
Why people might purchase different types of insurance, and how they work. So we talked a little bit about automobile, but let's return to that.
So I think people buy insurance for a couple of reasons. One is a feeling of protection, and another is real actual protection, I would say. And I don't want to dismiss the feeling part of it, but like if you know that if an accident happens, you're covered, there is some value to that. But if you're thinking purely from a financial perspective, the purpose of insurance is to protect you from risks that you can't cover yourself. And so from a financial perspective, you would want to think about, okay, what level of damage to my car would I be able to cover without it sort of harming me? I mean, obviously nobody wants to pay bills, but without it really sort of affecting my life in a really negative way. And you should insure for things that are more than that. And the reason for this is that you are paying the insurance company the expected damage to your car over time, plus the profit for the insurance company and the cost of managing the insurance company. And so you're not generally better off with insurance. You're generally worse off, but then you're better off if something really bad happens.
But you also do have to have insurance for legal purposes.
Well, yes, sorry.
Liability and
Yeah.
uninsured motorists.
Yes, so there's a requirement to have insurance to drive a car, and you have to have liability insurance that covers damage you might do to somebody else. So yes, absolutely. And then there's collision insurance, where you are protecting yourself from the damage done to your own car, and that's really where what I was talking about goes.
Health insurance?
So health insurance can be a little bit different because health insurance is sort of a combination of two things. One is it is risk protection against really big medical bills. But health insurance also is kind of like a buyer's club where the insurance company negotiates prices for different things, which will mean that you can actually be saving money compared to if you were paying independently. So health insurance is sort of partly insurance and partly group purchasing to get a lower price.
How about homeowners insurance?
So homeowners insurance, again, is protecting your home against damage. If you have a mortgage, which almost everybody does when they're buying a home, the mortgage bank will generally require you to have homeowners insurance to protect them against something catastrophic happening to your home, like a fire or something like that. If you get to the point where that's no longer the case, kind of the same logic applies. You would want the deductible on your home insurance to be any losses that you'd be able to manage yourself, but most people would not be able to manage if their home burnt to the ground, and so you'd want to be protected against something like that.
And then the last one, we talked a little bit for whole life versus term life.
So you're the expert on
Well,
that.
we already covered
Yeah,
that.
didn't we?
Yeah.
Do you want to do it again?
Sure.
Okay. Term life insurance is for a specific period of time, 5 years, 10 years, and you pay a certain amount of money every year to have that insurance protect your family from your dying. Whole life is also, you pay every year to protect your family, but it goes on throughout your life until you finally do die, sometime in your 80s or 90s.
It is an incentive to live longer.
It turns out to be very expensive to cover whole life insurance. Tends to be really quite expensive. Most of your life, you don't need that insurance because you buy the insurance to protect your family from your dying. And in the early years of your married life, when you have little kids and you want them to be able to grow up and have a decent life start, you don't want to take the risk, not only the risk of your dying, but the risk also of your kids not being able to go to the schools that they really ought to go to, live in a decent house, not be afraid of any kind of poverty. terrible things that can happen. So insurance against really serious risks that are very unlikely is term insurance in your 20s and 30s. Easy to make the case. Whole life, some people really like it. Most people say, no, it's not a good bargain, and I don't want it.
Thank you.